I was 28 years old when I spent Christmas Eve alone in the Canadian Rockies, and I wasn't supposed to make it through the night. The temperature had dropped to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. My phone was dead. My car was buried under 4 feet of snow somewhere behind me, and the only thing I could think about as hypothermia started to set in was the last thing my father said to me before he walked out when I was 12. "You'll never be strong enough for this world." I hadn't spoken to him in 16 years. I thought I'd moved on. But when you're facing your own end, you realize the ghosts you've been running from are the only ones who show up to say goodbye. My name is Marcus, and this is the story of how I almost lost my life trying to prove something to a man who wasn't even watching, and how the wilderness taught me what forgiveness actually means. The whole thing started 3 days before Christmas. I'd been working as a freelance photographer in Vancouver, barely scraping by, taking corporate headshots and wedding photos to pay rent. I was good at it, technically speaking, but there was no soul in anything I captured. My editor at a local magazine had been pushing me to submit something for their annual Nature edition, something raw and real. I kept putting it off. The truth is, I was terrified of going into the wild alone. I'd grown up in the city after my father left, raised by my mother who was so afraid of losing me that she kept me wrapped in bubble wrap, metaphorically speaking. No camping, no hiking, no risks. But that December, something snapped. Maybe it was turning 28, the same age my father was when he decided his family wasn't worth sticking around for. Maybe it was the emptiness I felt every time I looked at my own reflection and saw his face staring back. I needed to prove I wasn't him. I needed to prove I was stronger than the man who ran away from everything hard in his life. So, I told everyone I was spending Christmas alone in the mountains to get the perfect shot of winter wilderness. I rented a Jeep, packed my camera equipment, loaded up on supplies I barely knew how to use, and drove 4 hours northeast into the Rockies. I had a GPS, a satellite phone I didn't know how to operate properly, and the kind of confidence that comes from watching too many survival documentaries and thinking you understand what cold really means. The first day was beautiful. I'm not going to lie about that. The mountains were so massive they made me feel like I was nothing, which was exactly what I needed. I took hundreds of photos, my fingers going numb even inside my gloves. The light hit the snow in ways I'd never seen, turning everything blue and gold and purple. For the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. I set up camp near a frozen lake, got a fire going after 45 minutes of cursing and failing, and ate freeze-dried pasta that tasted like cardboard. I fell asleep thinking I'd actually done it. I'd faced my fear. I'd proven something. I woke up on December 24th to a blizzard that wasn't supposed to happen. The weather forecast had been clear. 3 days of cold but stable conditions. Instead, I opened my tent to a wall of white so thick I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction. The wind was screaming through the trees like something alive and angry. My fire was buried. My Jeep, which I'd parked about 100 yards away, was completely invisible. I made the first stupid decision then. I should have stayed in my tent, waited it out. But I panicked. I thought if I could just get to the Jeep, I could drive back to civilization, come back another time. So I packed up my essential gear, strapped my camera bag across my chest, and started walking in what I thought was the right direction. I found the Jeep after 20 minutes of stumbling through snow up to my thighs, but when I got there, I realized it was completely buried. Not just covered, buried. The drifts had piled so high and fast that the entire vehicle was encased. I tried to dig it out with my hands, with a small shovel I'd brought, but the snow was coming down faster than I could move it. My gloves were soaked through. My face felt like it was being stabbed with thousands of tiny needles. And that's when I made the second stupid decision. I decided to walk out. I had a map, I had a compass. I'd memorized the route back to the main road, which was supposed to be about 6 miles. In good conditions, that's a 2-hour hike. In a blizzard, with no visibility and snow that deep, it might as well have been 100 miles. But I was already scared, already embarrassed, already imagining having to call for rescue and admit I'd gotten in over my head. So I started walking. What I didn't know then was that I was walking in the wrong direction. The compass was acting weird, probably because of my camera equipment, or maybe I was just reading it wrong in my panic. After an hour, I should have seen something familiar. Instead, the trees just got thicker. The ground got steeper. I was going uphill when I should have been going down. By the time I realized my mistake, I was so turned around I had no idea which way was back and which way was forward. That's when the fear really set in. Not the nervous kind of fear, but the animal kind. The kind that makes your chest tight and your thoughts spiral. I checked my phone. Dead. I'd forgotten to charge it the night before because I'd been too focused on my photos. The satellite phone was in my backpack, but when I pulled it out, my frozen fingers fumbled with it and it fell into the snow. I dug frantically, found it, tried to turn it on. Nothing. The battery icon blinked once and died. I'd packed it without checking if it was charged. That's when the rage came. Not at the situation, but at myself, at my stupidity, at my arrogance for thinking I could just walk into the wilderness without real preparation and come out the other side like some kind of hero. And underneath that rage was something deeper. Shame. The same shame I'd felt my entire life. The shame of being the kid whose dad left. The shame of never being quite good enough, quite strong enough, quite man enough. I kept walking because stopping felt like giving up, and giving up felt like admitting my father was right about me. The storm got worse. The light started to fade even though it was only mid-afternoon. Winter days in the mountains are short, and I was running out of time. My legs were shaking from exhaustion and cold. My lungs burned with every breath of frozen air. Ice had formed in my beard and around the edges of my hood. I couldn't feel my feet anymore. That's when I saw the cabin. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. It appeared through the snow like something out of a fever dream. A small structure made of dark wood with a metal roof half collapsed under the weight of snow. But it was real. I stumbled toward it, fell twice, got back up, and finally reached the door. It wasn't locked. Mountain cabins rarely are. They're left open for exactly this kind of emergency. I fell inside and just lay on the floor for I don't know how long, shaking so hard my teeth were rattling. The cabin was barely warmer than outside, but at least the wind wasn't cutting through me. There was an old wood stove in the corner, some stacked firewood that was probably years old, a single wooden chair, and a sleeping platform with a stained mattress that looked like it had seen better decades. Getting that fire started saved my life, but it almost ended it too. My hands weren't working right. I dropped matches. I couldn't grip the kindling. I was crying from frustration and fear, and the tears were freezing on my face. But somehow, after what felt like hours, I got a flame going. Then another. Then the old wood caught, and suddenly there was heat, real heat, spreading through that tiny space. I stripped off my wet outer layers and hung them near the stove. I was wearing thermal underwear underneath, but they were damp with sweat and melted snow. I wrapped myself in an old wool blanket I found in the corner that smelled like mildew and mice, and I sat as close to the fire as I could without burning myself. That's when it hit me. I was stuck here. The blizzard was still raging outside. I had no communication. No one knew exactly where I was. I'd told people I was going to the Rockies, but that covers thousands of square miles. Even when the storm cleared, it could be days before anyone found me. And I only had the supplies in my backpack, 2 energy bars, a half-empty water bottle, and some trail mix. Christmas Eve. I was going to spend Christmas Eve alone in an abandoned cabin, possibly not surviving to see Christmas morning. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 16 Christmases without my father, and now I might not see another one because I'd been trying so hard to prove I didn't need him. As the night came on and the cabin filled with shadows that danced in the firelight, something strange happened. I started talking to him, to my father, out loud, like he was sitting in that empty chair across from me. At first, it was angry. I told him everything I'd wanted to say for 16 years. I told him he was a coward for leaving. I told him he'd destroyed our family. I told him how Mom had cried herself to sleep for months and how I'd learned to be silent so I wouldn't bother her. I told him about every birthday he missed, every school event where I looked for him in the crowd and he wasn't there. Every moment I needed a father and had to figure it out alone. I told him I hated him. And then, as the fire burned lower and the cold started creeping back in, I told him the truth. I told him I missed him. I told him I still remembered the good things, even though I'd tried to bury them. How he taught me to tie my shoes. How he used to make me laugh by doing terrible impressions of cartoon characters. How he called me champ, even when I struck out in Little League. How safe I felt when he carried me on his shoulders. I told him I was sorry. That's the part that surprised me. I apologized to him for not being enough to make him stay, for whatever I'd done wrong as a kid that made him choose to leave. I know now that's not how it works, that his leaving wasn't my fault. But in that moment, half frozen and possibly not surviving the night, I said all the things my 12-year-old self had been carrying. And then I said something I didn't expect. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it. Not because what he did was okay. But because I was so tired of carrying the weight of his choices. I was exhausted from trying to prove I was different from him, when all I was doing was letting him control my life from a distance. I forgave him so I could let go, so I could be free. I cried in that cabin, real, ugly crying that I'd been holding back for 16 years. And when I finally stopped, something felt different. Lighter. The storm was still raging outside. I was still in danger, but inside, something had shifted. I fed the fire through the night, dozing in short bursts but never really sleeping. Every time I started to drift, the cold would wake me up. Or I'd hear something moving outside and my imagination would convince me it was a bear or a wolf. The wind sounded like voices sometimes, like the mountain itself was having a conversation I couldn't quite understand. Somewhere around what I guessed was 3 in the morning, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The silence that followed was so complete it was almost frightening. I opened the cabin door and looked out at a world transformed. The snow had stopped. The clouds had cleared. And above me was the most incredible sky I'd ever seen. I'd never seen stars like that. Living in the city, you forget what the night sky actually looks like. But out there, with no light pollution for miles, it was like looking at the universe with fresh eyes. The Milky Way was a river of light stretching across the darkness. I could see satellites moving slowly overhead, and the longer I looked, the more stars appeared, like they'd been hiding and finally decided to show themselves. I went back inside, grabbed my camera, and went back out. I was still weak, still cold, but I had to capture this. I set up my tripod with shaking hands and started shooting. Long exposures, the shutter open for 30 seconds at a time, pulling in every bit of light the universe was offering. As I worked, I thought about my father again, but differently this time. I thought about how he must have been broken in ways I couldn't understand as a kid, how he must have been carrying his own weight, his own pain, his own feeling of not being enough. I thought about how hurt people, and how he probably did the best he could with what he had, even if his best wasn't good enough. I didn't excuse him, but I saw him as human, as someone who made terrible choices but who was also just trying to survive in his own way. And in seeing him that way, I could see myself differently too. I wasn't destined to be him. His weakness didn't define my strength. His absence didn't determine my worth. The sun started to rise around 7:30. Christmas morning. The light turned the snow pink and gold, and I captured that too. I took photos until my camera battery died, and then I just stood there, watching the world wake up. With daylight and clear skies, I could finally get my bearings. I climbed a small rise near the cabin and saw, maybe 2 miles away, a road. Not the road I'd been trying to find, but a road nonetheless. I ate my last energy bar, packed up my gear, and started walking. It took me 3 hours to reach that road. 3 hours of post-holing through deep snow, falling, getting up, pushing forward. But I made it, and 40 minutes after I reached the road, a truck came by. A local guy heading home from his night shift. He took one look at me and didn't ask questions, just loaded me into his warm cab and drove me to the nearest town. I called my mom from the hospital where they treated me for mild frostbite and dehydration. She cried. She was angry. She was relieved. I told her I was okay, and for the first time I actually meant it. I told her I loved her, and then I asked her something I'd never asked before. I asked her for my father's phone number. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she'd text it to me, but I should think carefully about what I wanted to say. I told her I already knew. I waited 3 days before I called him. I needed to be sure. I needed to know it wasn't just the trauma of almost not surviving talking. But when those 3 days passed and I still felt the same, I dialed the number. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was older, rougher, but I knew it immediately. I said, "Dad, it's Marcus." There was silence. I could hear him breathing. Then he said my name like a question, like he couldn't believe it was real. We talked for 2 hours. He cried. I didn't, because I'd already done my crying in that cabin. He apologized. He told me about his own struggles with feeling inadequate, with depression he didn't know how to handle, with making the choice to leave because he thought we'd be better off without him. He was wrong, and he knew it. But knowing it now didn't change what happened then. I told him I forgave him. He broke down completely. He said he didn't deserve it. I told him forgiveness isn't about deserving it. It's about choosing to stop letting the past poison the present. I told him about the cabin, about Christmas Eve, about how I'd finally let go of trying to prove myself to a ghost. We're not close. I don't know if we ever will be. He lives in Alberta now, remarried, has 2 kids I've never met. But we talk sometimes. Short conversations, careful ones. We're learning each other as adults, which is strange and uncomfortable and sometimes painful. But it's real. The photos I took that night in the mountains became the centerpiece of my portfolio. The magazine ran them as a 10-page spread. I started getting calls for wilderness photography work. Real work, the kind that pays. But more than that, I found something I'd been missing. A sense of purpose. A connection to something bigger than my own pain. I go back to the mountains now regularly. I'm prepared this time. I take courses. I invest in proper gear. I file detailed plans with park services. But I'm not afraid anymore. The wilderness almost took my life, but it also gave me something back. It gave me permission to be human, to be imperfect, to let go. Christmas is different now. I spend it with my mom, sometimes with friends. Last year, I sent my father a card. Just a simple one with a photo I'd taken of sunrise over the Rockies. I wrote inside, "Thinking of you. Hope you're well." He sent one back. A photo of his kids playing in the snow. On the back, he wrote, "They'd like to meet you someday, no pressure. Maybe someday I will, maybe I won't. But I'm okay either way." That's the thing about forgiveness. It doesn't require reconciliation. It doesn't demand that everything be fixed or that relationships be restored. It just means you stop letting someone else's choices control your story. When I look back at that Christmas Eve in the wilderness, I don't see it as the time I almost lost my life. I see it as the night I finally found it. The night I stopped running from my father's shadow and started walking in my own light. The night I realized that being strong enough for this world doesn't mean never breaking. It means breaking and choosing to put yourself back together, even if the pieces don't fit the same way they did before. The cold should have taken me that night. Statistically, I shouldn't have made it. But I think part of survival is deciding what you're surviving for. And somewhere in that cabin, talking to a ghost who wasn't really there, I decided I was surviving for myself. Not to prove anything. Not to be anything other than who I am. Just to live fully and honestly with all my scars visible. My father's last words to me before he left were that I'd never be strong enough. He was wrong. Not because I'm stronger than he thought, but because strength looks different than either of us understood back then. Strength is sitting with your pain instead of running from it. Strength is forgiving people who don't deserve it because you deserve peace. Strength is admitting you're lost and asking for help. Strength is surviving the night and choosing to see the sunrise. I keep one photo from that night above my desk. It's the Milky Way, stretched across an impossibly black sky, with the silhouette of mountains below. On the back, I wrote something for myself. You made it through, and you'll make it through whatever comes next. Because that's the truth I learned in the wilderness. We're all just trying to make it through. Some of us do it by leaving. Some of us do it by staying. Some of us do it by walking into a blizzard unprepared and somehow finding our way back. There's no manual for survival. There's no right way to heal. There's just the choice to keep going, to keep trying, to keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's not a typical Christmas tale. There's no neat ending, no miracle reunion, no moment where everything becomes perfect. But it's real. And if you're carrying something heavy, if you're trying to prove yourself to someone who isn't even watching, if you're running from ghosts you think will chase you forever, maybe this helps. Maybe knowing that someone else found their way through the dark makes your own darkness a little less lonely. We're all just trying to find our way home, whatever home means. And sometimes the longest journey is the one that finally brings you back to yourself. If this story meant something to you, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have your own story of survival, of forgiveness, of finding yourself in the wilderness, literal or metaphorical, leave it in the comments. We're stronger together than we are alone, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thanks for being here. Stay safe out there.